consciousness, but with the bigger picture.
Alright, good evening Earth, this is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting alone.
But there are many forms of consciousness in the universe, not just ours, and not just those of animals, other animals.
There we go.
It's been often assumed that
I'm going to start with some of the smaller forms, encircling the yellow orb.
Doesn't try and tie it all down to particular.
They will radiate around
or electrical impulses
and then into foreground of the picture plane.
In a completely different way.
Alright.
And the reason why
if I can get my tripod square,
think that there are many forms
I'll zoom in it a little because I'm going to start pretty small.
Is because they experience them.
There we go.
Through mystical experiences, through altered states of consciousness, through spiritual practices, through psychedelics traditionally taken in a number of cultures around the world.
There we go.
People have the experience of being in contact with a greater consciousness than their own.
Okay, here we go.
When Sir Alister Hardy in the 1960s started the Religious Experience Research Unit in Oxford, he was asking people in Britain if they'd had experiences that seemed to involve a conscious presence greater than their own, mystical experiences. He was astonished. Thousands of reports poured in. It turned out these are much more common than anyone had previously thought. Most people don't talk about them because they're shy to do so. They're afraid they'd be classified as mentally ill or something like that. But recent surveys have shown that as many as 50% of the population have had experiences of other kinds of reality, near-death experiences, spontaneous mystical experiences, including ones that occur in childhood, and other kinds of altered states of consciousness, which suggest that their consciousness is part of something greater than themselves. Now, in ancient Greece, they had the Eleusinian mysteries. Most of the culture there was influenced by this kind of mystery cult, which involved an initiation in a cave, which involved taking psychoactive substances. We don't know what they were. But this was a pervasive feature of Greek philosophy. And Plato, in his book The Timaeus, talks about the conscious universe. What he says is, "This world came to be, in very truth, a living creature with soul and reason, a single visible living creature containing within itself all living things whose nature is of the same order." So this is a vision of the entire cosmos as a living being, a living organism. And this kind of view was inherited by medieval philosophers in Europe, in the universities and in the cathedral schools. They were also influenced very much by the philosophy of Aristotle, who thought that all living beings have souls. The soul is the form of the body. It's what shapes the body, and it's what attracts a being towards its end point. An acorn, as it germinates into an oak seedling, is pulled towards the mature form of an oak tree by the soul of the oak. So plants have souls, animals have souls, the planets have souls, the stars have souls, according to this view. In fact, the Greeks, including Plato, called the stars and the planets and the sun the visible gods. And indeed, we still call the planets by the names of the gods and goddesses, Venus, Mars, Mercury, and so on. So, in medieval Europe, this was the standard worldview. Theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas integrated this Greek view, particularly Aristotle's view, with Christian theology to produce a view, an animistic view of nature. Nature is alive, the earth is alive, the planets and the stars are alive, they're conscious beings, the whole universe is a conscious being, animals and plants have souls, and the human rational mind is embedded in a level of the human soul which relates us to plants, shaping our body. The vegetative soul shapes our bodies and underlies regeneration and wound healing. The animal soul that we share with animals, gives us our animal instincts and emotions like fear, hunger, thirst, sexual desire, and so on. But the rational mind is that which is specifically human and to do with conscious thought, language, and reason. And that was the standard view in the Middle Ages. Now the reason I'm saying all this is because it's important to realise what a completely radical break the 17th century mechanistic revolution in science was, with everything that had gone before in our own culture and in all others. In the 17th century, the scientific revolution was a revolution precisely because it denied these traditional views. For the founders of modern science, nature was not a living organism, it was a machine. Animals and plants were not living organisms, they were machines, automata, unconscious, inanimate automata. The human body was a machine. And in the vision of René Descartes, who's founded this mechanistic philosophy most explicitly, the whole universe is made of inanimate matter, which works mechanically by pushing, by being pushed from the past through physical, mechanical causes. The stars and planets are mechanical objects made of unconscious matter. The Earth's an unconscious object. Our body is, the animal bodies are, plants are. The only things that were not mechanical and unconscious in the universe were God, angels, and human minds. Basically, what Descartes did was deanimate the whole of nature, drain the soul out of the whole of nature, so that all was left in nature was inanimate matter. But outside nature were God, angels, and human minds. And God was supposed to have created the world machine in the first place by being a brilliant engineer and mathematician, and pressed the start button, and then it was all supposed to go on more or less automatically thereafter. So we have an idea of completely autonomous, unconscious, mechanical universe, with the only role for God left to being to start it off and to interact with human minds, which were the only non-material things left in the universe. This is Cartesian dualism, and it dominated science for the first 2 or 3 centuries of its existence. And it created 3 splits, really, a split between religion and science. Religion got God, angels, and human minds, and morality. Science got the entire physical universe, including the human body. It created a split between mind and body in ourselves, that our minds were somehow utterly separate from our bodies, but interacted with them in a way that was profoundly mysterious. He thought it happened in the pineal gland. Modern Cartesians think it happens in the cerebral cortex. It's basically the same theory, it's just moved a couple of inches. It also created a split between man and the animals. We have rational conscious minds and purposes, animals don't. They're just machines. Therefore we can treat them as cruelly as we like in vivisection experiments. We can grow them in factories for factory farming. They're just mechanisms. That's the view which dominated science right up until the 20th century. But there was another movement within science in the 19th century, science and philosophy, which, where people tried to go beyond this dualistic view. A lot of people felt to have 2 completely different kinds of thing doesn't make sense. There should be just one reality. So one school of thought, the idealists, said the one reality is consciousness. Everything is ultimately conscious. The consciousness underlies everything. Matter is kind of dumbed down mind. This is the school of idealism in philosophy. Idealism here means the primacy of consciousness. It doesn't mean being idealistic about helping others or making the world a better place. It means the focus on consciousness as the primary, indeed only reality. That school of thought is undergoing resurgence today. The best known exponent of it is Bernardo Kastrup, a philosopher of mind. But the other school of thought in the 19th century that finally became dominant and became the dominant philosophy of science was materialism. The materialists said there's no such thing as this realm of immaterial spirit. It doesn't do anything. You can't measure it. You can't weigh it. You can't see it. Therefore it doesn't exist. God and angels don't exist. They're just figments of the imagination. So at one stroke, God and angels disappear from this mechanical universe. And all that's left is human consciousness. The only thing left out of this Cartesian dualism. Then you have the problem for materialists that they haven't been able to get rid of human consciousness. They've got rid of God and angels, but this human consciousness annoyingly persists. And this is where materialist philosophers have such a terrible job trying to explain it away. As Daniel Seth said, Daniel Dennett's book Consciousness Explained is really an attempt to explain consciousness away as a kind of illusion. The problem is that by saying consciousness is an illusion, doesn't explain it, because illusion is itself a mode of consciousness. And for those who say consciousness is merely an epiphenomenon, it doesn't really do anything, and consciousness has no activity, and we may experience it, but it doesn't do anything. It's like a shadow of the activity of the nervous system, has no agency, can't interfere with physical causality, we have no free will. This is standard materialist stuff. But the trouble is that it's a hard problem, because all attempts to explain it away in the end run into intolerable problems. John Searle, the philosopher of mind, described the debate within the philosophy of mind over the last 50 years as follows. A philosopher advances a materialist theory of the mind. He then encounters difficulties. Criticisms usually take a more or less technical form, but in fact, underlying the technical objections is a much deeper objection. The theory in question has left out some essential feature of the mind. And this leads to ever more frenzied attempts to stick with the materialist thesis. Well, some philosophers have decided to give up on that task of trying to stick with the materialist thesis. And that's really one of the origins of the modern versions of panpsychism, the idea that there's forms of consciousness in many different levels of nature. Galen Strawson is one of the leaders of this new panpsychist movement, and he argues that if we assume there's some kind of level of mentality, experience or consciousness, even in atoms and electrons, then the appearance of consciousness, the emergence of consciousness in humans, is no longer something completely different emerging from utterly unconscious matter. It's not a difference in kind, it's a difference of degree. And this is why many contemporary philosophers are now going over to panpsychism. Another one whose book recently came out is Philip Goff. His book Galileo's Error is a clear and I think forceful and well-argued statement of the panpsychist position. And his motive is primarily to deal with the hard problem of human consciousness. Because if consciousness is not just confined to human brains or animal brains, then it's easier to understand why we're conscious, because consciousness is no longer something special just for us, it's something much more widely distributed in nature. A more sophisticated and mathematical version of this is integrated information theory of Giulio Tononi, who points out that consciousness has an integrative capacity. It doesn't work unless there's a high degree of complexity, which has to be integrated, and consciousness works by integration. And so that's its defining characteristic. There's a lot of technical literature on this, but I'm just giving an overview. Now, as soon as we start discussing panpsychism, we realize this is not a new philosophy at all. As I've already mentioned, this is more or less what practically everyone in ancient Greece thought.
I'm going to zoom out a little,
so
it migrated to the left side.
Hellenistic forms is found in practically all traditions.
To the right, actually. There we go.
But in European philosophy in the 17th century, in response to Descartes,
wider amount of detail
there was
throughout the
already
rest of the
a kind
figures.
of panpsychist
But as you can see, that
reaction,
gets a pretty good circle of them happening throughout the yellow
One was Spinoza,
and radiating out from
Dutch philosopher,
or moving
who
into it.
argued that God and nature are the same. That nature is like the body of God, God is like the mind of nature. And so his was a panpsychist, even pantheist philosophy. God and nature were identical. It's just looked at from different points of view. Another and very interesting 17th century philosopher was Leibniz, a German philosopher, who argued that the whole universe was made up of monads, self-organizing units, and each self-organizing unit, including atoms, mirrored the universe consciously from its own point of view. So the universe was full of all sorts of individual beings with minds that each mirrored it from their own point of view. And each one mirrored it differently because every monad was in a different place. Just like everyone in this room is mirroring this room, seeing this room from a different point of view, from their own point of view. But everyone's seeing it differently because you can't have two people in the same place at the same time. What I Leibniz called the identity of discernibles. So he was saying the whole universe is full of minds which are all mirroring the universe from every different point of view. The most interesting 20th century panpsychist was Alfred North Whitehead, a British philosopher who was a mathematician as well. He wrote a fundamental book in 20th century mathematics called Principia Mathematica with his student Bertrand Russell when they were both at Trinity College, Cambridge. And Alfred North Whitehead, because he was a mathematician, was the first philosopher who properly understood quantum theory. In the 1920s, when quantum theory was just coming into being, Whitehead got it straight away. Most philosophers weren't mathematicians, couldn't follow it, but Whitehead instantly realized what a radical break quantum theory was. He showed that in quantum theory, which treats light and matter as wave-like entities, the quanta are wave-like, and because they're wave-like, Whitehead realized that you couldn't have a wave at an instant. You can't have an instantaneous wave. Think of waves on the sea. You can't take an instantaneous slice of a wave and say, here's a wave at an instant. A wave takes time to wave in, and it takes space to wave in. So it's spread out in time and space. So you can't define it in a particular time or place. And that's the fundamental reason for the so-called uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics, that fundamental particles are wave-like. Everything, in fact, is wave-like. And atoms are wave patterns. The nucleus is a pattern of waves too. The electrons in their different orbitals are resonant waves of activity. So what Whitehead showed is that matter is not stuff. 19th century physics had treated matter as stuff, like little billiard balls. The atoms were like tiny billiard balls, hard, impenetrable stuff that just persisted. He showed that actually what modern quantum physics has shown is that matter is a process. And it's a process because it's a wave. Everything is wave-like, even the smallest particles, even the smallest subatomic particles that you find in the Large Hadron Collider are wave-like. If it's a wave and if it's a process, then it takes place in time. And if it takes place in time, it has a polarity in time, a past and future pole. And what Whitehead argued was that this completely transforms our view of the nature of matter. His most original idea about this, I think, the one I find most exciting and interesting, is that it gives us a way of thinking of the relation of mind and body in terms of time rather than space. We're used to the idea that the mind is the inside, the body is the outside, there's the external world, the inner world. We use these metaphors all the time. They're spatial metaphors, my inner life, the inner world, inner consciousness, and indeed from the materialist point of view, the brain literally is inner. Your thoughts are supposed to be nothing but the activity of your brain. They're inside your head, they're inside, and the external world's outside, and the body's outside the brain, most of it. That we're used to that spatial metaphor. It comes into ordinary language as well. We're less used to the time version that Whitehead was putting forward. And what he was suggesting is that the mental pole, the pole of the mind, is the future pole, the physical pole, the body pole, is the past pole. He pointed out that even in quantum theory,
some of the
when
highlights,
you're working out the equations of quantum
mixture
theory, shredding the wave
for
equation,
some of the
for
body
example,
as well.
is the equation that enables you to predict all the possible things
out
that an electron or other
out.
particle could do. You fire off an electron from
It's
a
like-
cathode ray tube, in a cathode ray tube, and the Schrödinger wave equation describes all the possible things it could do. Now these are possibilities, they're not physical facts. They're part of physics, but they're not physical. they coexist as possibilities. But as soon as the electron interacts with something, a measuring apparatus or with another atom, then all these possibilities collapse down until you've got one measurable fact, which is now a physical fact. It's now the body, as it were. The body of that electron has a definite place. You can measure it in a particular place. And it's sometimes called the collapse of the wave function. Well, what Whitehead showed really was that this is a general principle about the way the minds work. Our own minds are arenas of possibility, our own conscious minds. Our consciousness is an arena where we hold together a range of possibilities. If we don't have many possibilities, we don't need to be conscious of it, and most of our habits don't involve considering possibilities. We just do it the same way we've done it before. Habits are generally unconscious. They're mental, but they're unconscious. Conscious minds are concerned with possibilities and choosing among them. So, for example, all of us chose to come here today. We could have done all sorts of other things this afternoon, but we chose to come here. And among the many possibilities, we chose this one, and we made it happen. It's realized, it's now a physical fact. We can be measured, photographed, weighed in this room. It's a physical fact, we're here. And our minds now open to new possibilities. So it's a constant interplay of possibility becoming physical, but as soon as it's physical, it's in the past, and then new possibilities open in the future. So this is Whitehead's conception of how minds work, and it gives us a way of thinking of consciousness as something that deals with possibility. It's a way of, I find a very helpful way of thinking about the nature of consciousness. And since possibilities aren't physical, they're virtual. They're virtual futures among which we choose. It helps us to understand that consciousness is part of nature, but it's not something you can physically measure, any more than you can measure all the possibilities that an electron has. You can only measure the physical facts when the wave function collapses, and you can say, well, the Schrödinger wave equation just gives us the probability distribution of what might happen, not what will happen. So, Whitehead was also a very important part of the birth of the holistic or organismic philosophy of nature. The old mechanistic materialist view was that we should explain everything in terms of the smallest things. Atoms are the ultimate physical reality, and therefore reducing chemistry to atoms is the way chemistry should go. Reducing life to molecules is the way biology should go. Reduce it to the smallest things in living atoms and molecules. So it's a matter of reducing to the smallest, because smallest is best.
Alright, so that gets the highlight working a little bit better, and on the central figure as well as the smaller figures moving into the center of the yellow. There we go.
But what Whitehead pointed out is that
so that's it for the moment. Thanks for watching. It's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Ranch in Taos, Mexico, working on oil painting alone. Have a good night, Earth.
Electron orbitals. And they're all processes. Atoms are processes, molecules